So in today's video, we're going to be looking at part 2 of my trip over to Oregon. If you didn't catch the first video, we went over some of the genetics and how cultivars actually go through a rigorous process of testing and a lot of different research to become an actual cultivar that goes into a bag. Today we're going to talk about something that surprisingly only started about in the early 1990s, and that's drought testing on turf. So we're going to learn what kind of extensive drought testing and research that they do to try to make sure that going into the future, you're going to have the best varieties out there that will also conserve as much water as possible. And part of this we're going to talk about as well why lawns are very important to the environment and the benefits that they actually have. I was able to talk to the executive director of the Turfgrass Water Conservation Alliance. They're all about trying to conserve water in the turf industry and also educate people on these benefits of turf. That's all coming up here in this video today. Let's get right to it.
Back in the early 90s, we started here at NextGen thinking of the future and where breeding needed to go. And one area that we really focused on was drought. We took it in a two-prong approach. We would select for deeper roots, and we would do that in a non-restrictive soil profile because we want the genetics to be able to express themselves. So if a plant is able to produce roots at a deeper soil profile, those are the plants that we would select. And the reason we focused on roots is if they can move it to those lower soil profiles, they can take advantage of water and nutrients as it also is moving down through that soil profile for a long period of time and stay greener longer. And so we made several cycles of selection going through the rooting tubes, and then we put them out into a turf trial, and we looked at the base population and the different cycles of selection to see if we did make a gain in drought performance. And we were able to prove in both perennial ryegrass and tall fescue that selecting for deeper roots improved drought tolerance. And so then that led to more drought testing. So how can we screen a large amount of material for drought? And so we started building these structures because anytime you're going to start looking for drought out in a field situation, you're going to get rain, right? So we started building these structures so that we could shield from the rain. They were inexpensive versus the retractable type of rain structures. We changed the plastic on these every year so that we're not interfering too much with the amount of light that's coming through. This is a TWCA trial, or the Turfgrass Water Conservation Alliance, and Jack will talk a little bit about that in a minute. But we started trialing in here and looking at the disappearance of rain over time. And in our tall fescues, you know, we can go 90 plus days without water and still retain, for a homeowner, a level of green color that is very acceptable. We're in that 25 to 30% green cover. Okay, so if a cultivar is able to stay greener longer than, you know, another cultivar, what is that difference in water usage? So then we started doing water use studies. So we would take a cultivar that we knew that was very drought tolerant and one that was drought susceptible, and how much water would it take to keep them at a certain percent green. It was really striking. When we looked at a Kentucky bluegrass, the difference in a summer, 90 days, was 5,000 gallons. When you're talking about a neighborhood, municipality, that's a lot of water difference. And so that's when we started thinking, okay, we need to move this into an avenue where municipalities can get this information and use it to their benefit. And so here at NextGen, we helped develop the Turfgrass Water Conservation Alliance, and that's brought Jack into the picture, and he now runs that organization. And his focus is getting to the water purveyors and so forth, EPA. So I'll let Jack talk a little bit about the TWCA.
TWCA, or Turfgrass Water Conservation Alliance, is a 501c3 nonprofit. It was created by direct competitors in the seed industry. So companies like TMI or Pennington, there are a number of companies. There's 9 seed producers in TWCA right now. And all combined, it's, what would you say, 70, 80% of the improved turf market?
Yeah, close to that right
Yeah.
now, yeah.
Now, that's not all TWCA qualified. It's actually a pretty small part of each person's portfolio because it is so time consuming and so expensive. So on top of all of the decades of research that it takes to get the cultivars here, this process adds about 5 years to it. This tall fescue trial right now is replicated in 10 locations across North America, including up into Canada. And that broad geographic range allows us to eliminate some of the confounding factors. So things like growing degree day or soil type or any number of things homeowners will talk to landscape companies about and say, well, is it going to work here because I have these special conditions? Yes, what we see is drought tolerance travels across locations genetically. So we can say that very confidently. The other thing that we've done is work with cooperators like NextGen, who deserves most of the credit for TWCA, honestly. Like, without them, we would never program. But the other thing that they've done that has been really transformative for our understanding of maintenance and turf is to look at inputs. So mowing height, fertility, pesticide, all of those inputs. And what we've seen is that things that perform well in drought stress carry that performance through a lower maintenance scenario. And it makes sense, right? You're not putting the water on. You don't need to fertilize. You're not going to have that same kind of pressure. So we've been able to see a very high correlation between the drought tolerance and lower maintenance needs as well. What I do, though, is I advocate for drought-tolerant turf and green build standards with municipalities, with water agencies, and we develop collaborative pilot programs that allow us then to say, this is a way to have a functional, livable community that uses less water. We're working right now with Salt Lake City. We have a very exciting program. It is the first ever turf for turf landscape conversion. So we are taking conventional bluegrass out of residences in Salt Lake City, and the city is helping us put in TWCA qualified turf with those homeowners. And what we are hoping to do is help the city of Salt Lake hit their long-term water conservation goals. And consumer conservation in the landscape is a huge part of that for Salt Lake City, as it is for municipalities all across North America. And so that is a great example of how our public-private partnerships are allowing us then to have a functional landscape that people will enjoy.
Yep. I think one of the most challenging things that I see right now in terms of the way the industry is going, especially on YouTube too, is someone sees a nice green yard and they automatically assume like there has to be so many bad things going on, or you have to be watering crazy amounts to keep it green or things like that. So I just kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of this and really getting that message out to people of why it's important that we still keep turf around and not just completely get rid of everything, and what it actually can do as a benefit too.
Yeah, so there are a couple of interesting points there. One of them is the misconception of turf as being an ecologically devoid landscape.
Right.
And that's just an unfortunate misunderstanding because it looks the same.
Right.
The reality is turf provides us a vibrant biome that goes both below the surface, that includes microorganisms and arthropods, as well as above. And it also helps us with critical ecological services that maybe we don't think about because we've gained these for free forever.
Right.
And it's things like stormwater management. It is increasing your infiltration so you don't have that surface problem. That Hortonian overland flow, I think, is what the kids call it if they're being fancy.
Right.
And it also reduces the ambient temperature. There is a reason that suburbs are, on average, 3 degrees cooler than urban cities, and that is because of the green space that's available. Something that we don't think about as much as maybe we should is the equity aspect of turf. What we've seen when we look at the health data that comes out is turf helps us all be healthier. It helps us reduce the number of diagnosed conditions in the most at-risk populations, the incredibly old and the very young. The conditions that it is most helpful with are things like anxiety and depression. And so it really is, in a lot of ways, a great equalizer for us to be able to live in a place where we all have access to green space.
Right. I mean, I've personally seen, even from when our house had like the first turf there that was probably just middle of the road sod or whatever. It was Kentucky bluegrass, but my transformation of things over time to much more of the high end water usage has gone down considerably in terms of, I mean, I couldn't go hardly a day with some of that bluegrass before it was like, I need water. And now I'm cutting 3/4 of an inch ryegrass, sometimes much less than an inch of water a week, and it's still, going well.
Yeah, and there's a real misunderstanding. People have this turf and they have this landscape, and there's a real misunderstanding of it, and that's one of the reasons that we are building educational tools aimed at the end user. So something that we're very excited about right now is a manual that we're calling Landscape Maintenance for Water Conservation. We are doing it with the Alliance for Water Efficiency and the Environmental Protection Agency Water Sense organization. And what we want to do is build an informational manual for dum-dums like me, homeowners who want to understand their landscape and they want to do better, but they just don't have that information.
Right.
And it's not a central repository that we've had before. And so combining a landscape manual that covers water budgeting and slope correction, as well as a lot of the maintenance things that need to be done that can either be hired out or a homeowner can take a stab at it at least once. Regardless, we want people to have that resource, and so we are partnering with EPA and AWE to go through water utilities and deliver that to their customers. So they will be able to use that and say, this is your maintenance schedule. Good education combined with great genetics is how we have been able to reduce the water demand of TWCA qualified turf.
One of the positive things that TWCA did, so prior to TWCA coming onto the scene, when universities were asked, where is your drought work? Because municipalities, especially down in California with the water issues they were having, they were paying people to pull out their lawns. And they asked the university breeding, where's your turf data on drought? They didn't have it. They weren't studying that because all they were focused on was turf quality, making the darkest, best looking turf grass. They weren't focusing on the other aspects that turf needs to fill. And so with TWCA filling that gap, that void that was out there, and getting this knowledge that there's hundreds of tall fescues, bluegrasses, etc. on the market. There's only a few that are drought tolerant. Tall fescues still today, we look at it as a whole crop that all tall fescue is drought tolerant. As a species, it has better drought tolerance than perennial ryegrass, but there's still huge differences within tall fescue and what is truly drought tolerant and what is not. And that's where TWCA has really stepped in at the national level to get that message across. So the private breeders with TWCA have filled that void.